on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. As we remember Julian Bond, and for many who are just waking up to this news, it's hard to be talking about remembering Julian Bond, who are so used to his presence on the forefront of equality and freedom in this country. Whether for gay marriage, environmental rights, the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement. We've been talking with the Pulitzer Prize-winning historian Taylor Branch. He's still with us from Baltimore. He was a close friend of Julian Bond. Ben Jealous will join us in a few minutes from Washington. Richard Cohen is standing by in Montgomery, Alabama, Southern Poverty Law Center, one of the organizations that Julian Bond co-founded. And Eleanor Holmes Norton is with us from Martha's Vineyard, delegate to Congress representing the District of Columbia, organizer for SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Eleanor Holmes Norton, when did you first meet Julian Bond?
I first met Julian when I was a law student, and I came to Atlanta to become a part of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee on my way to Mississippi. He was one of the leaders, indeed, a founder of SNCC. SNCC had just been founded just a few years before, when Ella Baker, the great seer and godmother of the civil rights movement, suggested that students get together so that they could have a real student organization. And Julian was a multi-talented member of SNCC. He was its spokesman. He was its writer. He was one of its major leaders. He was often the one you most often heard from, except whoever happened to be chairman at the time.
And what were you most struck by with Julian in those early years? And then his trajectory of issues through the decades as you became the Congress member, the delegate to Congress representing the District of Columbia. You worked together probably near the end of his life. Is that right?
Well, to the very end, until indeed just a few months ago when he and I had an intergenerational forum with leaders from Ferguson and New York after the police shootings. That's the Julian Bond I knew, the Julian Bond who, in his own way, never left the civil rights movement. Some of us, for example, John Lewis is my colleague in the Congress, had moved on to other pursuits while still being a part of the movement. Julian never left the movement, and he redefined the movement in his own image. He never thought the movement was about only blacks, so that he was easily able to grapple with the movement that involved women, that involved the LGBTQ community, that involved, yes, issues like climate change. He used his talent as a writer and a spokesman to continue to speak throughout his life. He lived in the District of Columbia and was my constituent. For the last 30 years, he became a spokesman for statehood for the District of Columbia. It seemed just so natural that Julian Bond, resident of the District of Columbia, would embrace statehood. I remember that when you got into a taxi in the District of Columbia coming in, Julian Bond's image would come up saying, "Welcome to the District of Columbia, where we don't have the same rights as everybody else." And you will remember that voice that became so familiar that Julian was sometimes used to narrate civil rights stories and civil rights videos. To the very end, he was always the spokesman, always the wordsmith, always the man of courage, always the man redefining civil rights for the moment.
We're talking to Eleanor Holmes Norton, a delegate to Congress representing District of Columbia. She's in Martha's Vineyard, where Julian Bond also spent time. She was a longtime organizer for SNCC decades ago. And